Good evening from Beijing and welcome to our special coverage of the Chinese President Xi Jinping's state visit to Brazil. I'm Li Dongning in Beijing.
I'm Pan Deng. President Xi Jinping is now in Brasilia for bilateral meetings after attending the 19th G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro. The trip is Xi Jinping's fifth visit to Brazil, which he describes as a passionate land.
Right, and as the largest developing countries in the eastern and western hemispheres, China and Brazil are both important emerging markets, and this year marks the 50th anniversary of the establishment of their diplomatic ties. So this visit could be crucial for how the two countries chart a new path for the future.
Indeed, and two guests joining us for more insights in the studio to provide more analysis on how this visit could deepen the China-Brazil comprehensive strategic partnership and bolster cooperation there. Business and technology author Edgar Perez and Professor Huang Jing from Shanghai International Studies University. Thank you very much for joining us on this special coverage. Now, President Xi Jinping's visit highlights the close ties developed between China and Brazil in recent years. Our correspondent Dan Williams has more about the upcoming meeting between the heads of state.
It will be here at the Alvorada Palace, the official residence of Brazil's president, where the two leaders will sit down and hold their bilateral meeting. In the build-up to this state visit, both presidents appear very much aligned with their visions for the future. That point was emphasized in an exclusive CGTN interview with President Lula ahead of the G20.
A minha relação com Xi Jinping é uma relação de muito respeito, de muito carinho e de muita admiração. E nós sabemos que para país ser desenvolvido tem que investir na educação. O que a China fez.
Trade between the two countries continues to strengthen. China is Brazil's largest trading partner and has been for 15 straight years. In 2023, the bilateral trade volume between China and Brazil reached more than $181 billion.
Onde nós pretendemos avançar.
We aim to make progress both from a diplomatic perspective and in terms of strategic trade agreements for Brazil. Brazil is heavily investing in this relationship with China today to establish a new standard for this relationship that can further expand markets and positively impact our economy.
Brasilia locals also point to the opportunities that have been created through the relationship.
I think it's always important to my country to be friends with any other country in the world, and I think China is of course a big economy and they have a large industry.
So I think it's important to Brazil, to relationships, international relationships. We must to have good relationships with other countries of the world.
The state visit comes as the two countries celebrate the 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations. Both China and Brazil look set to take that relationship another step forward. Dan Williams, CGTN, Brasilia.
Meanwhile, Chinese President Xi Jinping says he looks forward to having an in-depth exchange with Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva to enhance relations and promote the synergy of both countries' development strategies and also discuss international and regional issues of common interest. Xi made the remarks in a written statement after his arrival in Brazil. President Xi highlighted the strong partnership between China and Brazil, noting their deep political trust, fruitful cooperation and growing cultural exchanges under his and also President Lula's leadership. Well, 2024 marks the 50th anniversary of diplomatic ties between the two countries, and President Xi expressed his hopes to strengthen their strategic alignment and cooperation, ushering in a new golden 50 years. Our correspondent Paulo Cabral has all the details.
The article President Jinping highlighted the 50 years of diplomatic relations between Brazil and China, celebrated this year. Looking ahead, the Chinese leader stated that the two nations need to continue exchanging experiences in governance and development while strengthening strategic trust between them.
I think that Mr. Xi and this op-ed, he sends a message that China wants to be stable and a trustworthy partner and looks forward to enhancing this relation, this connection.
The article was also published on Folha de São Paulo's website, which is part of the Universo online portal, one of the most accessed portals in the country.
Folha is Brazil's leading newspaper, so it's natural for us to try always to provide our readers with important and best content possible. So obviously, an op-ed by one of the most important leaders in the world is newsworthy.
You, as a journalist specialized in international affairs, what's your evaluation of the current status of China-Brazil relationship, and how do you see this going into the future?
If you consider these 50 years of formal relations since 1974, it's obviously that we will have these ups and downs in terms of politics, especially depending on the Brazilian government in power. But I think that in a broader picture, we can consider that it's clear for us, and I think for China as well, that it has been mostly a win-win relation.
Paulo Cabral, CGTN, Rio de Janeiro.
All right, now for more insight, we check in with our panel in the studio. We have, as introduced to now, Edgar Perez and also Mr. Huang Jing. Welcome to our special coverage, gentlemen. I'll start with you, Mr. Huang. Well, since 1974, China and Brazil have developed a relationship, well, it's fair to say, marked by resilience and maturity. Do you think that this kind of steady relation between China and Brazil actually stemmed from both countries' commitment of mutual respect and mutual understanding?
Yes, I think both countries from the very beginning and identify themselves as third world countries or developing countries that have very similar national identities. And they both belong to the Global South and very active member of the Global South. And based on that, the two countries have never been hostile to each other, has always been friendly and never joined any coalitions against each other. This is
both are non-alliance countries.
Yes, exactly. And independent diplomacy, and based on that, both countries see each other as partners and friends. And based on that, both sides see that cooperation between two countries is mutually beneficiary, both in terms of politics and economic interest. And the worldview, both countries also are firmly against any kind of conflict and war and for peace. For example, President Lula has been very proactive in promoting peace and against war in that regard. And then China also takes similar stance. In that regard, both sides have great space, great room to cooperate with each other.
They proposed a 6-point consensus on solving the Ukraine crisis, Russia-Ukraine crisis. So talking about how do you think that countries like China and Brazil, although from both developing nations, but they are quite big economies, big powers in the world, that the connection or the two countries working together in terms of solving world conflicts like this?
I think first and foremost, neither countries has been kind of directly involved in any kind of conflict. They are the makers of the war, but they try to help others to solve this problem, which of course is doing damage not only to Russia and Ukraine, but to all the countries in the world alike. So the big powers, both in the West and the East atmosphere, trying to make a contribution to solve this kind of tragedy from more fair standard. I think in that regard, I think the two countries really utter a very strong voice presenting peace and stability of the global peace, or global village.
Oh, Mr. Perez, just to follow up on this Global South context mentioned by Professor Huang there. Actually, recently, President Xi Jinping said China will always be a member of the Global South, a reliable long-term partner of fellow developing countries, and Brazil also a member of an important member, I would say, of the Global South. In this context, how do you view the cooperation between China and Brazil?
Well, it's interesting to note that both countries are members of important global bodies. For example, the UN, G20, and also BRICS, which happens to be a very important element in terms of new relationships in the world. As part of BRICS, both Brazil and China are important economies around the world, and as so, they will be able to contribute to the development not only of their own economies, but also in the Global South, which, as you mentioned, encompasses many billions of people around the world. An important component today of the strategy of President Lula was to promote this alliance against hunger in the G20 movement and meeting in its last days, meaning that that's a very important thing to actually demonstrate to the world that it is possible to actually go through this process of defeating poverty, as China has demonstrated in the last decades.
All right, to get back to you in a moment, gentlemen. Let's check in with our reporter Chen Ziyuan at the Alvorada Palace in Brasilia, where the bilateral meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and Brazilian President Lula is going to happen. Ziyuan, so as we understand, a ceremony will be held to welcome President Xi Jinping in Brazil. What can you tell us about that?
Well, Mama, it's been very quiet here. You can hear the journalists are communicating with back home here because the security are very being heightened here. According to what you can be seeing just in a few minutes with my cameraman showing you that the welcoming ceremony will be held at the Alvorada Palace. And Brazilian President Lula will be holding the welcoming ceremony for Chinese President Xi Jinping on Wednesday. And President Xi said China and Brazil are like-minded, good friends and good partners. And definitely, as China, with this visit, they hope that both countries can open a new phase in their golden friendship of the two countries. So we're seeing a lot of press, and also the independence dragons are lined up on the streets that President Xi Jinping's motorcade that will be passing by to enter the palace. And that's all I have for now. Back to you in the studio.
Ziyuan, well, this is stunning here. Actually, the two presidents will also hold meetings later. What can we expect from that?
So what we are hearing is that after the welcoming ceremony, both will have bilateral meetings, and after that, they will witness the signing and exchanges of the cooperation documents. And after that, both presidents will be meeting with press, and a welcoming banquet will be held for President Xi as well. So a lot more activities will be happening on the ground in Brasilia on Wednesday. Back to you in the studio.
All right, thank you very much, Chen Ziyuan reporting from Brasilia. Now let's get back to our studio guests. Well, we just touched on the Global South community, and as a member of both the BRICS and G20 as very important member countries in those two organizations. How do you see countries like China and Brazil can collaborate together to craft maybe new or innovative resolutions in terms of facing the current global challenges or in the future global order even?
First and foremost, I think this kind of relationship has started with a mutual trust, political and economic trust, because both countries, as I said, have similar worldviews. Both countries have similar national identities. I think that both countries, a cooperation between them can set a very good example for two great powers to work with each other for mutual beneficiary, not only for that, but for the benefit of the people around the world, because both countries have quite different cultural traditions and civilizations. Instead of clash with each other, really work with each other. And I think that's a kind of a very good example. And on the basis of cooperations, I think there's 3 points. Number one, that both countries try to develop the economies, try to upgrade whole overall comprehensive upgrade of the economy, especially industrial base. And second, both countries can compensate with each other on the economic, in terms of economic development. Last but not the least, both countries have very good wishes and good willingness to work with each other. They see that by working with each other, it can really be both of them can be winners.
Now, Mr. Perez, if we trace back 50 years of bilateral ties between China and Brazil, we can actually see some firsts. Now, Brazil is the first country to establish a strategic partnership with China, and it was also the first country in Latin America to establish a comprehensive strategic partnership with China. Now, you're from the continent. Tell us how come this could be, Brazil and China's first?
Well, I think what is interesting that you mentioned before, when you think about both countries are very creative in terms of treating problems. For example, in the case of China, you wanted to make sure that the country is going to actually take new investment. They created Shenzhen, which is a city that only 50, 60 years ago was nothing. And the city actually grew up very quickly in the last decades and became one of the most important technology hubs in the world at this moment. In the same way, in Brazil, you have the capital where the meeting now between President Xi and President Lula is being held, Brasilia. It's a city that was inaugurated in 1956. It was a city that was developed. Of course, studies were in place for many, many decades. And finally, they decided to build a new city, moving the government offices from Sao Paulo to Brasilia. So as you can see there, these countries are created. They're actually seeing problems and they're following new approaches. And that's what we need at this moment where you have those very difficult problems impacting the world today.
What's your take on this, Professor Huang?
Yes, I think that there's so many spaces that two countries can really work with each other for energy, for new energy, and also for climate change. We know that Brazil has a large piece of rainforest. How to protect this rainforest not only matters Brazil's future, but for the future of all of us. And also, both countries that work in the aero industry and space industry and agriculture, for example, that major event, and also other areas. I think that the sky's the limit, like we said, that if the two countries want to work with each other, there's a great and very bright future between the two, before the two countries.
Well, gentlemen, we'll be getting back to you on this. Staying with our special coverage, during an exclusive interview with CMG's Wang Guan, Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva reviews that a state visit by Chinese President Xi Jinping this time could be the most important one since the establishment of the bilateral ties 50 years ago, highlighting China's vital contributions to Brazil's energy transition. He also emphasizes Brazil's willingness to deepen its partnership with China, which will bring benefits not just to both nations, but to the entire world.
I heard that there had been quite a bit of thinking, quite a bit of preparation going into that state visit.
Olha, eu acho que essa reunião ela vai ser possivelmente a reunião mais importante já feita entre Brasil e China. Nós temos, sabe, pensamentos comuns. A China é o mais extraordinário país no mundo asiático. O Brasil é o maior país da América Latina. Nós temos muitas afinidades e nós queremos compartilhar com a China aquilo que nós temos especialidade e a China compartilhar com o Brasil aquela que tem especialidade. E eu acho que vai ser uma parceria, sabe, excepcional entre Brasil e China. Nós vamos mudar e aprimorar a nossa relação.
We're marking the 50th anniversary of China-Brazil relationship. Our two countries are working very closely together. Brazil is now the largest Chinese EV export destination, and the Chinese approach is increasingly becoming made in Brazil for Brazil. BYD setting up a shop in Bahia State, the Great Wall Motor setting up a factory in the state of Sao Paulo. How do you see these Chinese-Brazilian partnerships contributing to the reindustrialization plan and green transition plan that you set for Brazil?
Eu acho extraordinário e trabalho muito para que isso aconteça. Eu, essa semana, fiquei muito feliz porque eu fiquei sabendo que a BYD, na Bahia, ela vai ter 20 mil funcionários. Ela vai produzir carros de bateria para exportar para outros países. E isso é muito importante para um país do tamanho do Brasil. Isso é muito importante porque as outras indústrias automobilísticas que tem no Brasil vão ser motivadas também a fazer grandes investimentos para que o mundo se transforme mais competitivo. Hoje eu recebi uma boa notícia. O Brasil, esse mês, bateu recorde de produção de automóveis. Olha, isso é um começo muito importante. Então, se a gente puder fortalecer essa relação China e Brasil, e aqui tiver mais indústria produzindo para exportar, trazendo tecnologia, produzindo bateria, discutindo, sabe, a questão espacial, se a gente estiver discutindo inteligência artificial, sabe, é tudo muito maravilhoso para o Brasil, para a China e para o mundo. Porque o Brasil tem interesse em compartilhar o seu crescimento com os países vizinhos.
Now, a welcome ceremony is going to be held for President Xi Jinping in Brasilia. And for more on that, we're now joined by our reporter Ule in Brasilia. Ule, so tell us more about the atmosphere there.
Hello, Dongning. Along with dozens of domestic and international journalists, we're now waiting for the grand welcome ceremony for the President Xi Jinping held by Brazilian President Lula in his residence. This is a presidential palace where President Lula and his government officials are working. But today, the grand welcoming ceremony is held in his residence to show the importance and the close relationship between the two presidents. And we know after the grand welcoming ceremony, the two presidents will hold a bilateral meeting. They will talk a wide range of topics, including trade, investment, and they will witness the signing of a wide range of agreements between the two government departments, including trade, investment, cultural and technological, and also cultural and people-to-people exchanges. Because we know this year marks the 50th anniversary of the diplomatic relations between the two countries. Earlier, President Xi had a signed article published in the Follow de São Paulo, the largest newspaper in Brazil and Latin America. He highlighted the importance of the two countries, the relationship, especially in recent years. The two countries have been the founding members of the BRICS, and also the two countries played a very significant role in leading the global South to a lot of global challenges, and especially during the G20 meeting, China is a strong supporter of the global alliance against poverty and hunger, and China and Brazil will work closely in the global South to have this voice heard for the reform of global institutions. And also, I want to mention that the two countries have very close ties in technological innovation, because we know over the past 35 years, China and Brazil has launched 6 China-Brazil Earth satellite, remote sensing satellites. These satellites play a very important role in monitoring and helping the forest and Amazon River and ecological and environmental protection. So the two sides has really paid close attention to the technological innovation. In recent years, a lot of Chinese companies come to Brazil to invest. For example, the automobile company BYD come to invest a huge number of money here in Brazil, and also many Brazilian companies go to China to invest, and they attend the CIE, China International Import Expo, every year, and they are exporting the Brazilian products, agricultural, and also meat to Chinese market. So we see earlier we talked to many Brazilian people, and they say in recent years a lot of Brazilian people hope to learn the Chinese language. So this have felt that the two people have a very close tie between the two countries. So many believe that President Xi's state visit will further boost the bilateral ties, especially usher in another new golden 50 years between the two countries. And we will be staying here and watch closely about their bilateral meetings and also agreements. So we will keep you updated about the latest. Dongning.
Thank you very much, Wule, for all your updates. We'll keep monitoring the situation in Brasilia, and where President Xi Jinping is going to be warmly welcomed with a very grand welcoming ceremony held by the Brazilian government, and a bilateral meeting will happen after that, and a series of agreements will be signed, witnessed by the two leaders, and they will both meet publicly with the reporters as well. And this year marks the 50th anniversary of the diplomatic relations between China and Brazil, and bilateral ties between the two world's biggest emerging economies continue to flourish. Take a look.
Brazil, the largest country in South America, is a land of vibrant culture, rich biodiversity and a booming economy. Known for its natural wonders like the Amazon rainforest and its lively carnival, Brazil also stands as a powerful force in global trade and diplomacy. China is Brazil's largest trading partner, with trade between the two nations reaching new heights each year. Brazil exports vast amounts of soybeans, iron ore and oil to China, fueling China's massive industrial economy. In turn, Brazil imports technology, machinery and electronics, creating a mutually beneficial exchange.
We intend to discuss with the Chinese a new strategic partnership between Brazil and China, a strategic partnership that involves not only the export of commodities, but also includes collaboration in science and technology.
Just as President Lula said, the partnership goes beyond trade. China and Brazil have strengthened their collaboration through the BRICS group of emerging economies. The two countries have cooperation agreements in IT, biotech, agriculture, aquaculture and healthcare. In the aerospace sector, the China-Brazil Earth Resources Satellite Project has jointly launched 6 satellites so far. The two sides also have dynamic cultural and people-to-people exchanges. Since February 2024, China and Brazil have agreed to grant 10-year visas for each other's citizens for business, leisure trips and family visits. With shared interests in sustainable development, Brazil and China are forging a partnership that shapes the future of international relations.
Our reporter Xu Xingchen caught up with Brazilian Senator Teresa Cristina on how the two nations can further expand cooperation.
Senator Cristina, thanks for speaking with us. So first, let's talk about China and Brazil. Trade is definitely one of the strongest aspects in terms of the two countries' relationship, exceeding $180 billion of trade a year. We're also witnessing that there is a growing interest from Chinese firms to invest in Brazil. And what are the sectors showing the maximum, the most potential, in your opinion?
China is already a major investor in the power sector in Brazil, especially in energy generation and distribution. But the sectors that still need to be developed are logistics and infrastructure. So although there already is Chinese investment in ports, I think that there is a lot that could be done to further increase Chinese investments in logistics. Because Brazil really needs that as an agricultural exporter.
Brazil hosts this year's G20 meeting, and Brazil and China are two leading economies in the global south. So from BRICS to G20, we can see nowadays that the global south is playing a bigger role in global governance. So in your opinion, how can these growing ties between China and Brazil bring peace and stability to today's world?
I think Brazil and China are two gigantic countries in their respective regions. China here in Asia and Brazil there in South America. So these two countries should definitely work together to promote peace and stability. Especially looking at China's pragmatism and China's ability to have a pragmatic and peaceful approach to things. So, the two countries should definitely cooperate further for this to happen.
All right, now let's get back to our guests, Mr. Huang and Mr. Perez. Mr. Perez, China and Brazil both hold the idea of multilateralism in the world, which is getting more and more difficult because the world is increasingly fragmented, as we can see right now. So how these two countries, the two biggest leading economies in global south, one the biggest economy in Latin America and the second largest economy in the whole world, can work together? What can they do to collaborate on this, on multilateralism?
Well, there are many aspects. If you look at the world overall, of course, as you mentioned, there are many different conflicts out there, and both countries, of course, hold an increasingly power relationship with both countries involved in different conflicts. For example, China has been very important in strengthening relationships between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which is something that is a diplomatic effort that it was new. And I think that's something that China can actually do, and also in other conflicts impacting the world at this very moment. In this case, it can be helped by Brazil, which is, as you mentioned, is also a very important country and the biggest economy in South America. So between these two countries, you have a very important voice representing the South. And that's something that we haven't seen in the last decades, when many of the countries in the North were pretty much directing how these conflicts would eventually be solved or perhaps delayed. And that's something that I think is going to be now in the agenda for both countries in the decades ahead.
It is pretty important and strategic and unprecedented as well to see the biggest biggest economy in Latin America and the biggest economy in Asia, actually the second in the world, to collaborate together. It's never seen before, Mr. Huang.
Yes, and actually Brazil and China has been working with each other on many issues before, but this time what is specific and unprecedented is that they work on the issues with global implications. For example, Ukraine war, and both countries raised the 6th point, which uttered a very strong voice for peace and stability. Now the two countries also work on some issues that challenge the entire human being. For example, climate change, new energy, and the space industry, and so on and so forth. This is quite unprecedented, and I think if the two countries work this way continuously, and there's a great future. Is like I said, the sky's the limit. I'm very optimistic about this bilateral relationship.
Now, turning to trade between China and Brazil, Mr. Perez, actually we got some latest figures. In the first 10 months of this year, the China-Brazil bilateral trade volume topped 1.1 trillion. That's about 152 billion US dollars. That marks almost a 10% annual increase. Now, you know the continent well. Tell us, how come the trade between the two countries could be this strong? This is not only for this year, actually for the past 15 years.
Well, that's the beginning of a relationship that is going to be strengthened. Last week, we were talking about the Port of Shanghai. We were debating about how this is going to facilitate the commerce between Brazil and China.
Could be another big booster, right?
Absolutely. When you think about Brazil, where do you think the ships are coming from? They have to go through a route that is very long, and it's taking a long time for products to come from Brazil to China, to Asia in general. So if you think about Peru's Shanghai port now, of course, Brazil would be able to send the products directly to Shanghai. And from there, 20 days, you're already in Shanghai or in any port in Asia. So I think this extraordinary amount of commerce in terms of these two countries, it's actually going to explode in the years to come.
Right, and talking about trade, we have to mention the specific items like beef, like soybean, like Brazilian nuts, which I'm very addicted to. Then, apart from those single items, Mr. Huang, how do you see the overall trade expansion between China and Brazil? Are we seeing other products than those three mentioned?
Yes, first and foremost, both countries have a large size of economy, very great size, and the future of the cooperation will be greater. I think instead of the areas you mentioned, the two countries has some other areas which has a great potentials. For example, the climate change, new energy, AI, and of course, like I said, upgrade the entire industrial base, and also in how to work together to not only to help the two countries, but the entire world to deal with new energy, because we do know that two countries are developing countries, both of them face some challenges in terms of energy consumption. If the two countries with the size of population continues a traditional way, I think we do great damage to climate. But if the two countries head on the direction for new energy, alternative energies, and I think not only benefit the two great peoples, but for the entire human being.
Right. Yes, sorry. I'd like to follow on the global implication you mentioned earlier, Professor Huang. So if we can take a bird's eye view of all those specific areas and a strong momentum in trade and in bilateral ties, we know actually the world is facing disruptions in supply and industrial chains, and also adding that to the geopolitical tensions we've already talked about. How can China and Brazil not only working close with each other, but also on multilateral platforms, as we've as we've witnessed quite a lot of this?
Yes, let's be realistic. On this world, we have a great uncertainty. On the one hand, there are two hot wars going on, which has done very much damage to all of us. On the other hand, we have some countries try to deglobalization, to cut off or decouple something, cut off the supply chains, and which I think is very counterproductive on that regard. And with the two big economies like Brazil, the largest in the continent, in South America, Latin America, and the second largest country. If the two countries can work together to continue this momentum of globalization, because globalization, the foundation of globalization is cooperation, it's not conflict. So that will not only promote economic development, which include everybody in benefit, but also can provide some basics for stability and peace, because I think the two countries work together will not only benefit themselves, but help to overcome the great challenges of geopolitical uncertainty and the economic interruptions.
Well, while we are seeing trade, because it is a very important factor or sector in multilateralism, then when we step back to take a look at the general trade between China and whole Latin America, we're seeing, we mentioned the other day, the blueberries from Peru and soybean beef and Brazilian nuts from Brazil. They're all agricultural products. How about in other areas? Because if we want to make bilateral relations, bilateral trade more sustainable, you've got to expand beyond agricultural products.
I think that when we work with each other, of course, we always have a low-hanging cherries. We pick them up to generate more capitals, more trust, and more cooperative spirit. Based on that, there are much bigger area you can go into, like we mentioned, like Brazil and China has a very solid cooperation program on the space industry. Both sides had launched 6 satellites on the Earth's resources. Both sides have worked together on new energy, on automobile industry, and we know Brazil has very good aero industry, right? Yes. We have lot of airplane actually is imported from Brazil as a commercial use, and also automobile industry, another example, new energy, and some others like AI, high tech, and chip, and so on and so forth. I think what really matters is not this cooperation, but like I said, set a good example that working together can benefit all of us, but try to cut each other off, the so-called protectionism or economic nationalism, so-called, that will be counterproductive. And I think that's the case. So what I mean is that this bilateral relationship will work out something much bigger than the bilateral relationship, which actually benefits the entire world.
Being forward-looking here, Mr. Perez, what do you make of the role of innovation, digitalization, because we talked about the green transition, even in fighting hunger, and we talk about trade. Technology cannot be missed. It's a crucial link here, right?
In agriculture as well, precision agriculture is needed.
Well, obviously the countries in the beginning will be thinking about this type of trade, but in the future we need to think about something else. And luckily, both China and Brazil are economies that are well advanced in many different areas, and complementary areas, I would say. Obviously, if you think about China, it's a great potence, world power in terms of artificial intelligence, 5G, broadband connectivity, and I think that example again can be applied to countries like Brazil, as an example in South America. Equally, Brazil is also a very important industrial power. I think in the world we have companies like Boeing and Airbus producing aircraft. Embraer is one of the companies that are actually in that industry too, and eventually might potentially be looking at entering into this field, competing with these two giants in the airfreight industry. So I think Brazil, both, and China will be able to eventually move up the ladder, moving away from just raw resources to more industrialized components.
What about mechanism building, Professor Huang? We talked quite a lot about the uncertainties the world is facing right now. We talked about soybean. Actually, that's not only an agricultural product, but it's a commodity. So that matters in political economics, right? So how can the two countries work together on this?
I think that first, the two countries have goodwill and a strong desire to work with each other. Xi Jinping's visit and his meeting with President Lula set the example to institutionalize the cooperation. That is, the two countries not only say the words but do the deeds, but sign the deals, sign the treaties to formalize or institutionalize this cooperation and then expand to the other side. And let's don't forget that both countries still have the huge task to lift the so-called poverty. Of course, China did a has done a great job in that regard, and Brazil has done it too. But still, there's still improvement, a large room of improvement to do. And also, both countries has also head into the so-called future of our industry, let's say high tech and AI and so on and so forth. I believe that the foundation of this good bilateral relationship is already been laid by the two leaderships. From now on, is how to work from here, how to work out a very productive and forward-looking programs that we can follow on.
Right. China and Brazil actually are both members of the G20, and they just attended. Okay, now let's go to Brasilia, where the grand ceremony held by the Brazilian government is being held to welcome President Xi Jinping's official state visit to Brazil. This is the live footage from Brasilia.
And Chinese President Xi Jinping is paying a state visit to Brazil now, and this is his 5th visit to Brazil. And as we just heard from Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva in that earlier interview, he said this could be the most important state visit since the two countries established diplomatic ties 50 years ago. And now the two countries are looking forward to ushering another 5 decades.
Exactly, as what President Xi described as another 50 years of a golden relations between the two sides. We can see the honor guards are marching on as part of the grand ceremony to welcome President Xi Jinping's state visit to Brazil. You're now watching live footage from Brasilia, and what we are seeing now is a motorcade escorted by Brazilian honor guards, and the meeting of the two heads of state and the grand ceremony as well is taking place at the president's residence of Brasilia, which is also known as the Alvorada Palace. The design and construction, as we can see a moment later, the construction of this architecture actually coincided with the building of the Brazilian capital. And the architect, Oscar Niemeyer, was the principal architect, and his modern architecture designs crowned the city a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1987.
And as we just heard from our reporter Wu, this is also a show of how close the two countries are, because this is actually taking place at the residence of the President of Brazil.
As the music background, it's really beautiful music. President Lula da Silva of Brazil is holding a grand welcoming ceremony to welcome the state visit by President Xi Jinping.
And China and Brazil are the biggest developing countries in the eastern and western hemispheres. As we just reported, trade between the two countries has been very strong. And from the grandeur of this welcome ceremony, you can tell that the two countries do have a very strong and healthy and forward-looking relationship. This year marks the 50th anniversary of diplomatic ties between the two countries, and both two leaders are very optimistic about relations ahead, vowing to create another 50 years of a good relationship. This is happening right now in Brasilia, and to be specific, at the presidential residence of Brazil, also known as the Alvorada Palace or the Palace of Dawn, one of the landmarks in Brasilia.
Also, the name actually coincidentally marks the very bright future of bilateral ties and to welcome the President Xi's state visit.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has arrived at the presidential residence of Brazil and is greeted by officials at the entrance of this landmark in Brasilia.
It's a lakeside construction, this architecture actually. And this visit actually carries a great significance for deepening the comprehensive strategic partnership between the two nations and fostering global South cooperation as well. You're watching live footage from Brasilia, the capital city of Brazil, where Brazilian President Inácio Lula da Silva is welcoming President Xi Jinping, who is making a state visit to Brazil.
And earlier, President Xi Jinping said he believes this visit will further strengthen the two countries' strategic mutual trust, deepen exchanges and cooperation in many fields. And now China and Brazil are having this comprehensive strategic partnership. And as we just mentioned, Brazil is the first country in Latin America to establish a comprehensive strategic partnership with China. Now, Chinese President Xi Jinping is reviewing the honor guards of Brazil. This is live footage from Alvorada Palace in Brasilia, the official residence of the Brazilian president. Chinese President Xi Jinping is now paying a state visit to Brazil, and in April last year, President of Brazil, Lula da Silva, paid a state visit to China.
And when describing bilateral relations, President Xi, his recent op-ed titled "A Friendship Spanning Vast Oceans, A Voyage Toward a Brighter Shared Future," he remarked that China-Brazil relations have withstood the test of changing international dynamics, becoming a model of win-win cooperation and shared destiny between two major developing economies, developing countries. And
trade that has been quite strong between the two countries. China has been Brazil's largest trading partner for 15 consecutive years, while Brazil is China's top trading partner and the largest investment destination in Latin America. And as we've been reporting for the recent 2 weeks, both countries have closely coordinated and cooperated on multilateral platforms such as the UN, BRICS and G20, safeguarding the common interests of both nations and developing countries, or we call the Global South.
You're now watching live footage from Brasilia. A grand welcoming ceremony is held by the Brazilian government to welcome President Xi Jinping to make an official state visit there. And President Xi's state visit, as we mentioned, coincides with the 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations between China and Brazil. Trade and economic relations have been steady between the two sides ever since 1974. And the President Lula da Silva, accompanied by his wife, are welcoming President Xi.
This is live footage from Alvorada Palace in Brazil.
That was a ceremonial guard band played the national anthems of both countries as the Chinese and Brazilian flags fluttered side by side, symbolizing 5 decades of enduring friendship. And you are now watching live footage from Brasilia, where a grand welcoming ceremony is being held by President Inácio Lula da Silva and his wife to welcome President Xi's official state visit to the country. And at multiple locations, the two leaders actually expressed their shared aspirations to deepen bilateral relations, both in President Lula da Silva's exclusive interview with CGTN and also in President Xi's op-ed article, that this visit is not only a reflection of their historical friendship, but also a new chapter for future cooperation.
And actually, there was this analogy from China's foreign ministry ahead of Chinese President Xi Jinping's state visit to Brazil. And it says the two countries, China and Brazil, enjoy time-honored friendship that is ever-flowing like the Yangtze River, that's in China, and the Amazon River, of course, is in Brazil. And that has brought the two countries close together, despite being thousands of miles apart geographically.
And actually, common aspirations can be found in every cultural corner between the two sides as well. Apart from the Amazon and the Yangtze River, we can find collaboration or collision of the two very different typical dances from China and Brazil, the samba and the dragon dance. When they meet together, it sparks new aspirations as well. So, Mr. Huang, when the two leaders meet and they are going to have official talks after this round of a grand ceremony, what do you expect the two leaders talk about in terms of bilateral relations and also a global situation as well?
I think that the two leaders, of course, will discuss in depth about how they can work with each other to benefit both countries, both peoples. As a major powers on earth, both leaders will express their views on the global issues, especially on how to maintain peace and stability, how to continue this trend of globalization which benefits both countries, how to go against the protectionism, against unilateralism, which is doing damage to all of us, and of course, last but not the least, how to promote the spirit of peace, not only to two countries, but to the entire world, because Brazil and China do have a lot of common interests in this regard.
Now, before we getting into more specific topics regarding bilateral ties, Mr. Perez, so first of all, you're from South America. Tell us what you make of this grandeur here. We're witnessing right now. We can see honor guards at the start, mounted honor guards ushering the convoy and motorcade of Chinese president. Now, the two countries' leaders are reviewing the honor guards marches. Is this common customs on the continent?
Well, indeed, that demonstrated the warmth of the Latin American people. And as we saw last week too, definitely President Xi Jinping was welcoming grand fashion in Peru. Equally, I see similar fashion here in Brazil. We would have been expecting some samba, but definitely it's very interesting. And I think that represents, 50 years of relationship, definitely is something very transcendental. So in that regard, I think this demonstrates the enduring friendship of both countries.
And as we are looking at the live pictures from Brasilia, we can see a bit of the palace, Alvorada Palace, from the picture at the right side, the left side actually. And I think our audience might be interested to know more information about this place. It is located on the shores of Lake Paranoá in Brasilia, and this is called Palácio da Alvorada in Portuguese, and in English it means a Palace of the Dawn. It's a modernist masterpiece designed by renowned Brazilian architect Oscar Niemeyer, and it's a sleek white columns, as we saw just now, and expansive glass walls embody both the forward-thinking ideals of Brazil's capital and also the openness of the diplomatic relationships. As President Xi's have arrived in Brasilia and is being warmly welcomed by President Inácio Lula da Silva. This really marks a significant start, a start of another journey after 50 years of very steady diplomatic relations, another journey of a future relationship.
And let's also remember, talking about landmarks like Alvorada Palace, the whole city of Brasilia, the capital of Brazil, was listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1987, of course marked by all those modern architectures you just mentioned. Now the two presidents are reviewing honor guards. It's Brazilian-styled honor guards march to welcome friends from afar, and of course this is also the highest level of welcome for head of state.
As we can see that a very big part of this architecture is made of glass, and I heard the meeting room that they're going to have a bilateral talks together is a very pleasant place. It has a panoramic view of the lake, as well as the whole view as well. I think it underscores the aspirations of this historic visit, strengthening bilateral ties and setting a vision for sustainable global cooperation.
Well, the mounted honor guards again, they're the ones earlier ushered in the motorcade of Chinese President Xi Jinping. Now they're reviewed by the two heads of states.
Indeed. And as a part of this very hospitable and also very warm welcome ceremony held by President Lula da Silva and his wife.
So, Mr. President, the mounted honor guards is kind of common on the South American continent. How come?
Well, I think it represents the history of the country. Brazil was an independent country only since 1822. And that means before that, it was actually dominated by the Portuguese. That's why when you talk about people in Brazil, you will see that many of the last names have many roots. For example, it can come from Portugal, like in the case of the president, Lula da Silva. That's a very Portuguese last name. But when you mention the name of the architect who designed Brasilia, Oscar Niemeyer, that sounds German to me. So that represents the diversity of races in Brazil, from the local Aboriginal population that has lived there for long, to the Portuguese people who arrived after 1500s, 1600s, and then many other colonies. For example, people from Poland, from Germany, who arrived to Brazil, who now, of course, they forgot their own languages, but nonetheless, they now speak all Portuguese. And equally, an important contingent from Asia, both Chinese, Japanese, and many different populations who are now form part of this amazing country called Brazil.
And in his op-ed, President Xi especially mentioned that China and Brazil should showed the same or shared responsibilities to face this world of uncertainty. So, Mr. Huang, what shared responsibilities are we talking about here?
Yes, as an important member of Global South, as the two largest developing countries on this, of course, the shared responsibility means both countries want peace and stability, both countries uphold multilateralism, both countries want to promote global governance based on multilateral arrangements. All of this, of course, is, I think, the right momentum on the right side of history, because on this earth, in this world, the uncertainty is mostly caused by some very aggressive behaviors and some kind of hypocritical double standards on this, and also some protectionism based not on human beings' interests, but on some very selfish interests on that. And also we have very ugly demonstration of unilateralism, which try to gain the others, sacrifice others' loss, and this kind of thing. And also we have people see the whole world as a game, as a zero-sum game, and try to maintain the hegemony, so on and so forth. And both countries, of course, the biggest responsibility is to make sure that in this world, in this global village, we all should treat each other with equality and mutual respect. That's a foundation for all the meaningful cooperations. I think Brazil and China should set good examples by doing business like that, instead of based on equalism, based on hegemonism, based on unilateralism. That's something that we should try to prevent against. And if, for example, unilateralism prevails, there's all of us will suffer from it.
And Mr. Perez, you are from South America, and you are now living in Beijing, traveling between the two continents at least. I know you are a global traveler too. So what do you make of the role of cultural exchanges between China and Brazil being conducive to better ties?
Well, being in China, for example, it's very difficult not to see places where they teach samba. And obviously it's a very popular dance here in Brazil. You see a lot of Chinese people who are very good, experienced dancers, and I think that's very impressive. So these people-to-people cooperation, interaction, I think it's going to be very, very important in the future too. Now, Brazil is the only country in the world in the Brazilian soccer team that has won the World Championships 5 times. And you can imagine that players actually don't start in very sophisticated facilities. They actually start playing soccer with small balls of clothing, playing in favelas, which is the shanty towns in the different cities in Brazil. So we can learn from that spirit. The Brazilian spirit is very different, very rich, very warm, very, and I think that's very something that we can learn. And that energy actually is translated into this capability, to be able to dominate a sport that is very difficult even for different countries in the world. So I think that's something we can all learn from that.
In that regard, actually, you can say culturally we are complementary as well. Talking about cultural links, Penny mentioned the connection between the Amazon and Yangtze, although thousands away, they seem to have a certain kind of a connection apart from environmental protection culturally as well. So do you think similar projects like that will further promote China and Latin American cultural links, and in a step back, in the larger picture, the global inclusive cultural links? Mr. Huang.
Yes, we live in a world which we are all different. That's why the differences make us also beautiful. I think that's why instead of so-called clash of civilizations, I think that we should really adhere to the spirit of all civilizations are good. Civilizations should learn from each other, benefit from each other, and eventually work with each other. In that regard, the Amazon, the mother river for Brazil, and the Yangtze River, the mother river for China, I think represent the kind of spirit and culture in which the people have to work together to make best use of this natural gift. On the other hand, work together to prevent some disasters, because we do know that Yangtze River and the Amazon River has been some disasters. And more importantly, those two rivers represent the kind of Mother Nature gave us. We should protect them. And the so-called environment protect started from the two rivers. And also we can take advantage of the two rivers to develop economy. But meanwhile, it's more important for us to make sure the kind of gift we receive will pass on to the next generations, will not do damage to them. That's why the environment protection, new energy, and so on and so forth are very important areas that Brazil and China should and will work together.
Differences should be celebrated. It's a part of a Chinese philosophy as well. To be not to have uniformity, but differences remain is accepted in Chinese philosophy. And the differences, cultural differences especially, should serve as connections, bridges, instead of walls separating us. It should be something that connect us to accept who we are, who you are. And that's why the main theme of this year's G20 summit is to build an inclusive planet.
Oh, indeed. And this shared idea should be also passed on from generation to generation. And during that welcome ceremony, we also see that Brazilian youth, Brazilian kids lining up, welcoming Chinese President Xi Jinping. Professor Huang, you are an educator yourself, and you're from Shanghai International Studies University. I know that university has lots of foreign students alike. So what do you make of the role of academic exchanges, educational exchanges in bilateral ties?
I think the education exchange is one of the higher level of cultural exchanges, because one who engage in educational exchanges are those who are well educated, who know who they are, who have a strong desire to know who you are, because we are different. That's why that's a foundation that we learn from each other. We have this strong desire to understand you, to learn where you come from, because we want to work together. Without this kind of mutual understanding, mutual trust, we cannot work very well with each other. So that's a foundation. Based on that, I think two countries or two peoples do have a lot to offer from each other. For example, in China, we have this so-called hospital, the savings and so forth. We have a lot of experience and a lot of DNA that to work together as a team for the future. But from Brazil, we know the upwardness. Brazilian people is always smiling, always upward, always forward-looking. Like nothing is will scare us. It's always very optimistic, and this is great to learn. And myself, I'm a good fan of football, and Brazil is a superpower in that regard. We have a lot to learn from there, and also dancing. Of course, to me, dance is not just we're happy with dance. Dance also expression of friendliness, expression of we, the people who want peace, we want work with each other, because only in the peaceful environment you can dance, you can play football game, right? You can imagine that we're at war with each other, we don't trust each other, we think each other is going to kill me or you're going to kill you. This kind of, if we're hostile with each other, we cannot dance, we cannot play football game together, right? So I think all of that started from a kind of foundation of mutual trust, mutual respect, and equal footing.
Thank you very much, Professor Huang Jing and Mr. Edgar Perez there. Now, China-Brazil trade has been increasing steadily this year. Bilateral trade, as we just reported, hit 1.14 trillion yuan. That's about $160 billion in the first 10 months of this year. That's an increase of about 10% annually. China has been Brazil's largest trading partner and export destination for the past 15 consecutive years. And Brazil has long been China's top trading partner in Latin America. Paulo Cabral reports.
In recent months, electric vehicles have become the most visible symbol of Chinese products in Brazil, with car manufacturers investing significantly to establish their presence in the Brazilian market. Chinese electric car maker BYD, the leading seller of EVs in the country, is planning to build a factory here. However, BYD's relationship with Brazil dates back to 2017, when they started producing solar panels at a plant in the São Paulo countryside.
So it's a huge market, even for bus, trucks, now solar panels, and also the automotive sector. And now we are seeing that everything is growing, and Brazil, it's one of the most important markets for BYD worldwide.
Besides the consumer products, there is also heavy investment from Chinese companies in Brazil's infrastructure. Energy is among the highlights, with growing participation in generation assets and also in transmission lines badly needed to carry power across the country.
From 2010 to 2022, investment from Chinese companies, state-owned enterprises, small and medium enterprise, has entailed around $70 billion. So China has become the largest trade partner and the largest investment in Brazil.
When it comes to exports, agriculture is the top sector for Chinese investment, with big purchases of products such as beef, corn, and above all, soybeans.
China is Brazil's main customer for agricultural commodities. However, exports are highly concentrated in just a handful of products.
This officer from Brazil's Farming Confederation, CNA, says producers in the country are working to expand the range of products offered to China. In recent years, fruit consumption has increased among Chinese consumers. CNA sees potential in further expanding fruits and nuts exports.
We want to do business with China. We want to maintain this partnership at this moment when diplomatic relations are completing 50 years. We want to keep this for the long term. We want this partnership to be increasingly enduring because it is a market full of opportunities for Brazilian products.
The governments of Brazil and China have already made it clear that both sides are interested in deepening commercial ties and businesses to further strengthen bilateral trade and investments in the future. Paulo Cabral, CGTN, Lusiânia, Brazil.
And the Chinese community in Brazil have welcomed President Xi Jinping's visit. They say the bilateral meeting between China and Brazil presents opportunities to deepen cooperation.
两个国家都是大国，
China and Brazil are major nations and members of G20 and BRICS. With the government under President Lula, bilateral relations have been growing closer. Brazil's economy has been on the rise in recent years, which presents China with a great opportunity. There are many enterprises and technologies in China that can be well matched in Brazil. The two countries' focuses are different. Brazil has abundant resources, while China has a lot of technology and production capacity that can provide better goods to help Brazilians improve their lives and enhance industrial and economic standards.
China and Brazil established diplomatic relations 50 years ago. Both countries have cooperated across various fields over the years. So far this year, more than 1,000 Chinese enterprises have started business in Brazil. I hope President Xi Jinping's visit to Brazil will further deepen the cooperation between both nations.
As China and Brazil mark 50 years of diplomatic relations, some Sichuan-manufactured hydro turbines have been seen as some symbols of strengthening economic and trade ties. Zhao Chengchen is in Sichuan and filed this report.
Right behind me, the model of a new type of hydro turbine is being tested. Now imagine it to be 20 times larger in scale. These China-developed turbines have been running across the Madeira River in Brazil for over a decade. Hydropower in Brazil contributes to over 70% of the country's electricity production. And that's where Chinese companies are seeing opportunities for economic growth and cooperation.
I just led the team to the Giraffe hydropower project in Brazil. We found that the 22 turbine units manufactured by our Dongfang Electric are performing well.
As of 2022, the plant has generated 86 billion kilowatt-hours of electricity, powering millions of homes in Brazil, while reducing 60 million tons of carbon emissions annually. As Brazil advances its renewable energy initiatives, the teamwork between China and Brazil is key to meeting the country's green ambitions.
We noticed that the new energy in Brazil is flourishing and growing. We hope to seize such opportunities to provide them with the best technologies for the development of Brazil's new energy sector.
The Giraffe hydropower project was and still is the largest order in terms of installed capacity and sealed deal. But there are more sectors waiting for cooperation opportunities. In April, Sichuan province led a delegation of representatives from several enterprises on a visit to Brazil. This was followed in June by Brazil's inauguration of a new general consulate in Chengdu, which facilitates visa processing for southwest China. With the newly established ties, a commercial mission from the Brazilian state of Mato Grosso will visit Chengdu for the first time in early September. Capitalizing on Sichuan's strengths and Brazil's unique products, the collaboration between the two sides is expected to extend across tourism, agriculture, cultural exchanges, and educational initiatives. Zhao Chengchen, CGTN, Chengdu, Sichuan Province.
And Chinese brand electric vehicles are getting increasingly popular on the streets of Brazil. And our reporter Xu Jinchen has more details.
This is a brand new offering to Brazil from Chinese car maker BYD. New energy-powered pickup truck, a booming segment as the Latin American country fixates on its green drive.
Let's come on board.
The truck doesn't look much different than regular trucks, big and beefy.
And start the car.
Just a couple beeps.
Hear that. This new offering of a hybrid pickup truck is said to be more powerful than gasoline ones, with a 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in under 6 seconds. But it's super quiet, isn't it? And this is amazing. This is an amazing car. It's much more powerful. It's a regular pickup in Brazil, has around 230 horsepower. This car has more than 400 horsepower. It's amazing.
This new offering comes at a time when popularity of NEVs in Brazil continues to rise. In 2023, sales of electric vehicles in Brazil almost doubled compared to the previous year. And it is easy for people nowadays to spot Chinese new energy vehicles on streets and metros such as Sao Paulo.
China, in my opinion, is the leader of cars.
But I think the technology and the future is electric car or hybrid car.
Malls getting open to people come with the electric cars, and actually the price of the recharging cars in Brazil, it's really not expensive.
For BYD, the company accounts for 40% of the local NEV market.
The new energy vehicles market in Brazil, we can split before BYD and after BYD. In major parts, the cars in Brazil is gasoline. Yes. And produced in Brazil, only gasoline. And we make the movement of this. With BYD, we grow the market more than 10 times. Yes. And now with the local production of electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, what has happened? The other OEMs start to make this movement too.
2024 marks 50 years of diplomatic ties between China and Brazil. While the two countries are working together in many sectors, green development shows a lot of potential so that the two countries can share opportunities and growth.
You're watching The World Today on CGTN. Stay with us.